What is up, guys? Welcome back to another YouTube video. My name is Royce Chamberlin. I'm a videographer based out in Tampa, Florida, and I've got a quick video for you guys this week. It's a little bit different. Normally I cover camera equipment, or I'll cover projects that I've done in the past, traveling here and there and meeting with this person and that person and cool experiences like that. But today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to be very informative in this one. And it's a quick video, but I think it's really important for people who are learning or want to learn videography or even photography. And so today I wanted to talk about camera settings and how to use them. We'll dive right in. You can think of camera settings kind of in a triangle aspect, where one side you have what's called ISO, another side you'll have what's called shutter speed, and then on the third side you'll have your aperture or f-stop or t-stop or whatever you call it. There's a few different ways to refer to that one. Same with shutter speed. There's also shutter angle, but we'll get into all of it. I'm gonna try not to get too technical with it, but still break it down enough to where you can kind of understand. Let's start off with the practical things. We'll start off with what I think everybody already kind of understands, and that would be the ISO. And the best way to explain ISO is fake light. It's essentially taking your image and digitally increasing the brightness or making it darker by lowering the ISO. And that's really all there is to it. Another aspect or another way that ISO can affect your footage though is in the noise or in the grain. Typically a lower ISO, you'll have less grain, and the higher ISO, when you're really pushing it to see in the dark, right? You're gonna notice a lot of grain, a lot of color, noise in there, and it's not gonna look great, especially when you get way up. And some of these cameras can go really high, into the hundreds of thousands. A normal ISO is between like 500 and 800 maybe. And your camera, depending on what camera you're using, cinema cameras, photography cameras, they have a native ISO that just works best with that camera. For example, I'm filming on a Canon C70, and if you Google it, if you look it up on Canon's website, the native ISO for this camera, which means it's gonna perform optimally at 800 ISO, roughly. Give or take, I'm okay with playing with that, right, in certain scenarios, but typically I leave it at that native ISO, which is where it should be, right? I'd say that's like neutral for where it is. And that's pretty much all ISO is. Fake light. It can be used a couple different ways. You can have noise issues with it, so on and so forth. But let's move on to shutter speed. And you may have heard me mention earlier that it can also be referred to as shutter angle. And that goes back to way back in the day when people filmed on, well, an actual film. And that's because the cameras were built differently. Shutter speed in a normal camera, there's a little piece that moves, okay? And if I were to break this down sort of in a complex way, what the shutter speed does is when your camera's videoing or taking a photo, it's allowing a certain amount of light and information to hit the sensor. How long you leave that window open to gather light and information, that's what the shutter speed is. Okay, so imagine it this way. If I was drawing a line from one side to another, and I opened my eyes and I drew the line, and then I closed my eyes, you'd see the whole line. But if I opened my eyes really quick and really like rapidly, right, as I'm drawing that line, all you would see is little moments of that line being drawn. And it kind of works that way. For instance, if I were to have a really slow shutter speed, a second, 2 seconds, and I'm taking a photo, it means the camera is keeping its eyes open for multiple seconds. And anything that moves in those multiple seconds, it's gonna capture all of it. It's gonna look like a line being drawn. Things will be moving, and that's where you get weird effects like this, when things look like they're blurry and they're moving, and you get that cool effect that sometimes you don't want, right? And to avoid that, you would have a faster shutter speed that's only capturing small moments of that action happening, okay? And that's typically used for action shots, high speed, chase movies, fight scenes you'll shoot, you know, something that's capturing all the moment, right? But there are rules to this. A cinematic rule is whatever frame rate you're shooting at, and we can go into these type of settings on another day. Frame rate's a little bit different, but let's say you're shooting at a normal frame rate of like 30 frames per second. A normal shutter speed would be 1/15, 1/15, however you want to word it. But that half of the frame rate is like the standard, is what I'm trying to get at. That's like the rule of thumb, I guess you could say. But of course, when you really know how it works, you can manipulate it in different ways. For instance, if you wanted a shot to be really crisp, you could turn it up so you have all the crisp motion, you know, and you don't get any motion blur. That's what that's called, by the way. But if you do want more motion blur, then you would turn that down and you'd get a really crazy looking, like almost slow-mo, but not, you know, it's weird. It can be used cinematically, photographically, I don't know. But anyways, so that's the second part of our triangle. The lower part of our triangle is where we get into aperture. Personally, if you know what it is, I think it's everybody's favorite because it's a lot of fun, mainly because, and this is the simplest way to really describe it, blurry background or not blurry background. That's pretty much, well, not it, but that's how most people perceive it. If I told you that a lower aperture meant blurrier background and a higher aperture meant less blurry background, you could look at an image and tell me which one is which, okay? But there's a little bit more happening inside of your camera. This one's a lot of fun because it looks cool too, the way that the mechanism works. It's like a circular, spirally thing that has a ton of different triangles within it that all kind of close as it twists together and opens as it twists open, right? And what's happening here is, you remember earlier with the shutter speed, our shutter is opening to allow X amount of light in, right? However much light that you know window is open, that's how much light that it's letting in. The aperture is how much light is actually coming towards the shutter. Does that make sense? So imagine the aperture is all the way open. We're letting max amount of light in, okay? We then open up our window, flooding in. It's gonna be a bright image. We've got a long exposure. Your image is receiving a lot of light. Those two can work together to, one, light your image, and two, kind of uniquely create your image. If you have a really wide open aperture, you're gonna get a really blurry background, okay? Things are really focused. If you close that aperture and there's a really small opening, or funnel they would call it, of light coming in, then you'd have a really not blurry background, and that's just how it works. I don't want to get into the science of it, but that's the easiest way to describe it, okay? All of those working together, if you get your aperture right where you want it, right, blurry enough background, enough lights coming in, you get your shutter speed where it looks natural, right? And then your ISO, hopefully you don't have to touch it, but if you have to, you have to. As long as you have those three things set, then you're cooking, okay? You now know how to use your camera settings, and all of it kind of takes playing with, but just remember the rule with aperture. There isn't one. Always shoot open is the common one. And then the rule is just the most fun way to shoot aperture is all the way open, because then the background's always really blurry. It's harder to focus, but it's a lot of fun. The rule with shutter speed is always keep your shutter at half of what your frame rate is. That's just the rule. If you're shooting at 60, should be 30. If you're shooting at 120, should be 60, right? And so on and so forth and whatever, right? That's just the rule. Rules can be broken. It's fun to break them when it comes to videography and stuff. And then the rule for ISO also is just try to avoid using it, I guess, because you don't want to let more noise in. Just kind of keep it at that native ISO. In a pinch, you can play with it, but I wouldn't. I have. There's been scenarios, but typically noise is not good. No. So anyways, I hope you guys learned a little bit from this video. I hope it was informative and that everything kind of made sense. If something didn't make sense, let me know in the comments. I can explain further there if you'd like me to, or I can make a whole video about it if you'd like that as well. But don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you guys in the next one.